before I talk about our union, it's important to talk about Fiocruz, an institution that for 120 years fights for public health. And one of the issues we are going to bring here is about COVID-19. Fiocruz is the institution that is really confronting the COVID-19 in every possible way, from the production of the vaccine, which we hope will be all right, and in March 21 we're going to produce it. Also, the assistance with the building of a hospital that is a reference hospital in Brazil and in Latin America to confront COVID-19. We also have labs that have trained the professionals of Latin America for the diagnosis of COVID-19. So our institution, Fiocruz, is working pro-population, in favor of the population. Most of all in Brazil, which population is in a majority of Black people. So many people in Brazil, most people in Brazil declare themselves to be Afro-descendants. Outside of Africa, we are the second largest Black population in the world. We are only after Nigeria, and we act to defend the rights of workers in our union, human rights too, and we are in a struggle for the defense of racial equality. We are also in the movement Black Lives Matter in Brazil, and also the movement called Stop Killing Us, because in Brazil, as Agrippina said, we still have statistics, but these statistics are not very nice. We need to fight a lot so that they change. For example, every 23 minutes, a young Black man is murdered in Brazil. So we have an hour and a half of a life, and many lives will be lost with this structural racism that we have in this country that was made by a enslaving society. So we're going to speak about different issues, and I hope that this debate today and the exchange of experiences, it's important to know what Latin America has done to combat racism and to fight in the fight for racial equality. And Latin America must unite. It was mentioned here, but built by a enslaving system. That's why we today, who descend from Africans, we have been enslaved, and we must unite ourselves, especially because of a racial equality, and most of all for reparation. The world deserves to have reparation, especially to Mother Africa and we, the Afro-descendants. Thank you, Michelle. Now, Pablo Souza.
Compañero, prenda el micrófono, por favor.
Podemos trocar, ok.
Debe prender el micrófono, compañero.
Please turn on your microphone. Now, can you hear me? Okay, welcome. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I was saying, sending my greetings to the International Public Services, Agrippina, this Hawks, and to all of our panel brothers and sisters here participating in this meeting. I'd like to say that in Uruguay, we have a society where 8.5% of the population in Uruguay, they are Afro-descendants, about 255,000 inhabitants in our country. This, in our country, the situation in terms of COVID-19 or the pandemic, that was stated in March this year. And then from there, government took different measures that had to do with confinement. So when you have mandatory quarantines that allow to stop the progress of exponential growth of COVID-19, special attention was given to the labor situation, that many activities were stopped. For example, education, be it primary school, secondary or university level. Also cuts in transportation and movement of people in public transportation, buses, and measures were taken also to control the border between Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina, and also measures taken towards those countries that were declared as countries at risk, and citizens of those countries that came into our country, they had to undergo a mandatory quarantine of about 14 days. And these containment measures that were ordered by the government, somehow they had a very strong impact at the social level. So we're talking about there's somebody talking. About 200,000 workers that didn't have work, and adding to that, about 200,000 workers with irregular situation, and others that went into unemployment payment. So this made the situation that we had been going through already since 2015, with the decrease of our economy and having a extraordinary debt at the international level, foreign debts that we had that was on our country, and that did not allow us to have enough resources to invest in processes that would generate workplaces and positions for workers, and a situation that made it even worse and more acute under the pandemic. And there was no other alternative by our social partners and the unions, but to carry out activities that had to do with first care to population in risk that was unemployed, or that also were receiving payment, insurance, and they had no formal link to work. So they were very vulnerable. So we carried out activities with about 300 areas where, since the beginning until this day, they've been trying to help in the situation. Now, the government, we have to say that in Uruguay, government that took over this year with economy policy which is neoliberal, and we were coming from 15 years of a progressive type of government, and we went then towards a more right-wing government with a fascist component to it, belonging to the military, and also to the process of a coup d'etat that we underwent from 73 to 74. So today they have a very important number of people working in government from that movement. So to say that our country was the one that invested less in the pandemic, and there was no wide concentration of population in our country. So to date, the situation is relatively manageable. We can deal with it because we don't have such high concentration of population. But this is just keeping people from moving about. And so the circulation of the virus today, we have 59 infected, and we have come up to 80 per day in terms of contamination. There were points when we had about 20 people infected per day and a population infected, or about 200 and something people. I refer to all these topics because the economy suffered, and this is a very dependent economy, especially dependent on international investment. And with the cut of these investments and with this process of the cuts, the parliament is not really facing the situation that most of the population is going through. So we were projecting at our country's level an increase of the GDP of 2.5% for this year and 1.9% for next year. And these projections have really went down. And with the correction of this calculation, we have a negative projection of 6 points, so 3.7% below of the negative value of our GDP. And so this has really decreased the income rate here in the country. Now, Carlos, I'm sorry, as we're talking about, what you're saying is very important, but are you telling us what's happening with the pandemic in your country, in Uruguay? And for us, it is very important what you're saying, because many of us, we do not know. We think that Uruguay is a wonderful paradise, and with President Mujica, but we see that there was a negative side to it. So afterwards, we will be sending you some questions, and you can tell us a bit of that. And in reality,
Uruguay. Correcto, entonces.
You'll be showing us the reality of your country. So we are going to cut now. We're going to continue with the presentation of our brother Luis Miguel Morante, Afonso, and then we continue with you and Michelle, and you will continue telling us all these concepts.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm from the Confederation CTC in Colombia. I'm the president. She's the first labor congress. It is the first labor congress we had in Colombia, and it has been created for 75 years. And we have started our struggle in 1905 because of the oil issue. So, you know, all the possible wealth that we have. That's why we have been fighting for so many years. But it's also, it's a struggle for labor rights, and especially with the oil industry, with the second industrial revolution. And very briefly, we created the CTC in 1935. This is the history of our struggles of workers in Colombia. We have the CUT and the CTC, two labor congresses, the largest ones in Colombia. Today, we are working in unity, trying to get demands and fighting in this pandemic so that the social situation is not that serious. And with the problem of unemployment and also because of precarious wages, we have a plan to work together, and we have been working for 8 months together. We have been isolated, but also we are in activity. We have done some large mobilizations during the pandemic, and we were able to stop certain things, the advancements of the government or the attacks of the government against workers, attacking the working class through the entrepreneurs. As Agrippina said in the beginning, our labor congress was founded by workers with Afro descendants deriving from the West and the Pacific and the Atlantic coasts, both. Many of these people, among others, someone who came before me as the president, Manuelito Hurtado, and like Agrippina Hurtado, so we have some nexus between these two names. And equally, 65% or 66% of the workers are Afro-descendants. So this, and we have other affiliates too, but these presidents, besides Manuelito Hurtado, we had other presidents, Jose, and others more. And there was one who was murdered in 2016 in Cartagena, murdered by a guerrilla, and they kidnapped him and then murdered him. For sure, the struggle continues. We have a strong work going on around the whole country in the agribusiness sector and the financial sector. In all of the sectors of the economy, we are present. And today, we don't want to lose any more labor rights, and we have social concerns. We are supporting and protecting Social Security, which is under a process through entrepreneurs and government. They want to decrease our rights in terms of Social Security. It's jeopardizing this aspect. And in Colombia, the social protection should exist for workers, but the Social Security is specific for the workers, but they have been affecting it. They have been changing it. So I have other things to say, but for the moment, for the presentation, I will stop here so that my other colleagues from the panel can participate. Thank you very much, and fraternal greetings to all of you. Thank you. Thank you, brother and friend Luis Miguel Morantes. If I'm kin with the CTC because I'm Hurtado, I don't know. But we will continue now, and we will speak about all the movements that have happened for racial justice. In June, there was the killing of a man, George Floyd, in the US in the middle of the pandemic, and that created a wave of protest all over the world and the movement of Black Lives Matter. And we could see how not only in the US, but in Europe and in many parts of Latin America, there was social protest for Black Lives Matter because this killing during the pandemic recalled this structural racism, this racial inequality, this lack of justice. And not only they kill Afro-descendants in the US, they kill them every 23 minutes in Brazil. In Colombia, they also killed them in Soacha, in different areas of Colombia. Afro-descendants have been killed. Some of them were under 16 years of age. And so this movement of Black Lives Matter brought to us during the pandemic, we had to start talking for social justice and racial justice. That is not happening and which is global. That's why the International Institute of African Workers and other institutes, the trade unions, they all must speak about racial equality. And that's why her sound has disappeared. I will start asking Michelle if in your trade union you have plans for to stop the breaches and fight for racial justice for Black people. And when Sosa was mentioned, when they cut off so many things from us in the pandemic, how can we deal better with the Afro-descendant people? Welcome, Michelle, and please answer us what's happening with racial justice in Brazil.
Well, in Brazil, the Black movement is very strong in Brazil. What my organization, my trade union, as FOC, we participate and we give support to different movements within our own institution where we work, that we represent. We have a committee that works with gender and race, and we build a policy within our institution to promote racial equality. Unfortunately, we know that this is still going to take a very long time. There are studies that say that it will still take another 150 years, but we have to start doing our part. We know that the Black population, we live and we have the worst jobs, more precarious jobs because of lack of schooling. There is little incentive for schooling and our education, and it's difficult for us to reach this racial equality. But we have to give support to these movements in Brazil. We have the policies with the quota, racial quota. Rio, which is the state where I live here in Brazil, was the first state to approve racial quota in public universities. This afterwards went to the federal government. But when the left wing was in power, we made a lot of progress in justice, racial justice, through affirmative action, the quotas, the expansion of public education. These are ways that contribute for us to come together in terms of racial equality. So Black Lives Matter, Stop to Killers movements, as I talked about, stop murdering us. It's a very strong movement here in Brazil, in Rio. Rio has many slums around the city, all over the city. And during this time of pandemic, social movements, collective movements, along with the congressmen, progressive ones and left-wing ones, they had to go to federal court in order to put an end to police operations, incursions in the slums in Rio. So that's the point that we have to come to the Supreme Court, so that there's no police incursions in the slums in Rio, because homicide is huge. The bullets that we say that they are not lost or stray bullets, they are actually found, they find people, and this is the movement that we're making. When we fight for Black Lives Matter with the affirmative actions, with quota movements, we're fighting for the lives of Black population, and we go together. And it is important for us to say here in Brazil, this month is considered Black November. November 20th is the day of Black awareness. It was the day where our most important leaders, Zumbi dos Palmares, he was murdered, where they had a community of resistance in Brazil. And it's very important to say that in the movement that we're doing, there is this action where we fight for African awareness and racial equality. Thank you, Michelle. Carlos, equally for you. You were already, you've only been there for 2 months, but maybe you can tell us, you have this strategic plans, especially during the pandemic, to help our population, our Afro-descendant population, to minimize the impact of this pandemic that has been really, really suffering, specifically with the Black community. And he needs to turn his microphone on again.
¿Se escucha?
Now, can you hear me? Yes? Okay, so his microphone is on now. We couldn't hear you before. Now, yes? Yes? Hello? Okay, now we can hear you. Yes, okay. Well, I was saying that, give you some reference, because I was saying that the Black population in our country is 8.5%, and to say that unfortunately in our country, the possibilities of carrying out joint actions are very difficult. It's very difficult because where they take place, the participation and where they take place is uneven. So the political and partisan type of problems, it's very difficult to have that reflected by different political institutions. So we had a government that was called the Colored Party. Over 200 years of continuous government in our country. Today we have the party that was from time to time took office, but for 15 years we had that progressive government. But unfortunately, the link of our communities have been carried out through the development of culture, but at the level of organization, we've been totally separate in different groups. And then a centralized policy is not carried out on this topic. And some players can encourage and push some specific actions in terms of Black people, but in the case of Floyd and the whole repercussion that we had in the world, we tried to mobilize, and as we were trying to work actively in the Labor Congress, and we worked for over 2 weeks to try and carry out some activities to express our repute for this situation. But Latin American, also for African descendants and those who are displaced or that somehow are separate, and especially talking and about the situation that we had in Brazil, but in Colombia as well, with social workers. And we tried in our country, but the possibility of joining forces in this struggle is very difficult. But we were able to make small steps. The progressive steps were racial quota for joining public service, for example. And on the other hand, we also took into consideration um, to take into consideration the situation of the Black population in our country, because in the census, they were general, there was no clear statement of the Black population at the social level. So there now you have the differences that you can see at the general level, especially with the poorer sectors of our population, to see where actually we are located in our society as Black people. For us, it is a difficult struggle to unify, and so that all unions or trade unions can work on that, but to, especially with the pandemic, this will be seen very clearly.
Gracias, compañero Carlos.
Thank you, Brother Carlos, and also for Luis Miguel, the same question.
How in your labor congress, if you have strategic plans at this moment, most of all, strategic plans to fight against inequality, racial inequality, and labor inequality. And most of all, now during the pandemic, what is the role of CTC? As Carlos has mentioned a little bit about the problems of the killings, systematic killings, and now the killing of trade union and social leaders. This is alarming. Welcome.
Ya empiezo.
Yeah.
Me está fallando un poco el Wi-Fi, se me desconecta.
My Wi-Fi was failing a little bit, but okay. I will give you the answer. Well,
En el último año,
in the
se ha
last year,
recrudecido la violencia contra los grupos
we
minoritarios
recognized
y
violence
fundamentalmente
as a
en el año
social
2020,
problem.
en
And
medio de la
the
pandemia,
year
fueron mucho
to
más fuertes que todo el
2020 was
tiempo
the year to
intenso.
fight violence, the year of
Nuevamente ya
pandemic.
lo dijo Agripina,
And
mencionaba
as
muchos
Agrippina
líderes
has mentioned,
afrodescendientes
many
en Buenaventura,
Afro-descendant
Tumaco,
leaders in
Chocó,
Buenaventura, in
en
Chocol,
muchos
in
lugares
Tomanco, in many
son
places of
dirigentes
Colombia,
que
where
defienden los derechos
leaders
de
that are
afrodescendientes, el
defending the
territorio
rights of
o algunas
Afro-descendants, whether
compañías
it's the
han
territory or
sido en
jobs,
favor
or they
de
have
la
done actions in
equidad
favor
racial. Y
of
desafortunadamente
racial
los hechos los hemos
equality. And
denunciado públicamente
unfortunately,
y tenemos
there
que
have been
lamentablemente
killings, and it's
desde hace más o menos
very
2 meses
uh,
personas
about
asesinadas
2 years
judicialmente
ago.
unos
Pardon me,
jóvenes
about 2 months
afrodescendientes
ago, some
estudiantes
Afro-descendant young
tanto en el
people were
Cauca como en Nariño, es
murdered,
decir, y este
students in the
país
Cauca, in the
y
Marino, and
me ha dolido mucho esta situación.
and that was a
En este
terrible
momento
pain
estamos
for us.
precisamente
At this
haciendo
moment, we are we are communicating now that the Human Rights Day is approaching. We're going to denounce that. They were leaders from all different sectors, also indigenous leaders and Afro-descendant leaders. And the people from human rights are defending the environment, and they are many times Afro-descendants. They are defending the environment when they defend that, and we have in the Pacific side a kind of environmental paradise, and they were defending it. So the struggle has been very intense, but the CTA is denouncing it internationally. And we are writing a report. Up to now, it has been 70 massacres, 70 killings, when they killed 3 or more, or 3 to 8 people. So there has been massacres. Obviously, you will see the evidence of this at the international level. There are 70 killings with 300 victims that fell, but also many young people. These 2 young people who were victims in 22. This is a bad time. We have this latent problem. But now, with the struggle of everyone, this conference seems to be very valuable and important, because we are here from all over this continent and discussing about human rights with our African brothers too. And we're trying to unify our struggles and to do away with discrimination. And also, this year, we had the problem with the brother that was Floyd, who was killed in the US by the police. And this was a great, everyone was outraged, and this brought up the awareness of Black people. CTC is working on this, and we will continue to work on this. And we can count on Agripina and other organizations that are supporting this struggle. Thank you to you, to Michelle, Carlos, all of you, for such an important participation. Thank you. Thank you, Morantes. As you can see, brothers and sisters, the major problems on racial justice that appear in the region is the killing of this population, and the killing of leaders, both social leaders and trade union leaders. We know that this is happening in the US, in Mexico, and this is made visible through the structural racism. And the protests must make this visible, but the protest must achieve racial justice, because the whole world is looking at this and sees what happens to the Afro population. We are stigmatized. In this context, I would like to start with Michelle, and most of all, talk in Brazil, where the trade unions are very strong. What is the influence you have had, or how could the
Todos los
unions
ciudadanos
become
en Brasil están eligiendo el
stronger?
Instituto Latinoamericano por la Igualdad Racial y
There is the
Étnica
American
y
Inter-American Institute for Racial
las centrales
Equality,
sindicales se han
and
apropiado
the
de este
labor
tema
congresses have
después de mucho
appropriated
avance
this
con el gobierno
issue,
del
and
presidente
you
Lula y el
had many
presidente Dilma.
advancements
Pero sí
with
quiero,
the
queremos
governments of
escucharles
Lula and
Michelle,
Dilma.
¿cuál
But
ha
we
sido
must
el
listen
papel
to
de los
you.
sindicatos
What
en
was
la
the
justicia
role of the
racial y
unions
sobre
in
todo
terms
cómo
of
podemos
racial
hacer la diferencia,
justice?
cómo nos
And
puede
how
desde
can
allá
we
de Brasil
make a
enseñarnos a
difference?
todos y
How
todas
can we
cómo
learn
podemos seguir
from
haciendo la
Brazil
diferencia
and
en
make a
búsqueda
difference
de la justicia racial.
in terms
Adelante,
of
Michelle.
racial justice? How can we do it?
Obrigada, Ricina. É,
Thank you.
vamos botar assim, né? Eu acho que os sindicatos,
Let's
no ponto de
say,
vista do
I
Brasil, como
think
você
that
falou,
the
eles são muito
unions in
fortes, né? Eles
the
estão,
unions in
eu acho
Brazil
que
are
desde o
really
momento que a
very
gente
strong.
luta
From the
pelos
moment we
direitos
start
trabalhistas, né? E
fighting for
quando eu falei que a gente tem uma
labor rights,
população,
and we
né, que
have
a maioria é
a
negra, você
population
está de uma
of
forma
black
lutando por uma
majority,
justiça
somehow
também
you are
social,
fighting
né?
for
Você
social
lutar contra a
justice. If
precarização
you fight
do
against
trabalho,
the
né? Das condições
precarious
precárias do
jobs and
trabalhador, também
precarious
você
conditions
está
for
lutando
workers,
por uma
you
justiça
are also
racial quando a
fighting
gente
for
vai
racial
olhar que,
justice
né, a
when we
maioria,
look
né,
at
desses
the fact
trabalhadores, né,
that most of these workers
são
are
negros.
black.
Mas foi igual aqui no
But
Brasil, foi aprovada uma
it's the
reforma
same thing in
trabalhista, né?
Brazil.
Eles
They
falam que é
approved a labor reform. We
um
say
processo
it's a process of a neo-colonial process, a new colonization with a new kind of slavery, but with regulations. So the trade unions,
isso eu também
and
falo, como a gente
and
tem,
I
por mais que
say
não tenha
that
serviço
because we
público,
are
e
here
por
in
mais que
the
a gente venha
PSI, Public
somos
Services
servidores
International,
públicos, e
and
que a
although
reforma
we are
trabalhista,
public servants
uma reforma
and
trabalhista não iria
the
impactar
labor
aos
reform
servidores
would not
públicos, mas
have an
mesmo assim,
impact on
todos os
public
sindicatos,
employees, but
principalmente os
despite this,
sindicatos
all of the
dos
unions, most
servidores
of all
públicos
those
lutaram
who
contra essa
are in the
reforma
public
que
service,
infelizmente
have
foi
fought
aprovada. Então,
against this
foi,
reform
né, um
that
ataque
unfortunately
à
was
classe
approved. It
trabalhadora e é em
was an
cima do
attack
golpe que
against the
apresenta
working
Dilma
class,
sofrendo, né?
and
Então,
it helped
isso
the
também,
coup
com toda essa
d'etat
luta, essa
that
militância, a gente está, de
Dilma
fato,
underwent,
lutando por uma
and
justiça racial.
she
Embora que
fell
às vezes
as a
não
president.
tenha, né, esse
So
nome da justiça
sometimes
racial. Mas é
we
por
don't
isso que
call
você me
our
pergunta o que que a
struggles
gente pode estar
racial
fazendo mais. Então, a gente
justice.
precisa, de
So
fato,
when
dar
you ask me
nomes,
what we
né?
can
Então,
do,
aqui no Brasil,
is
como eu
we
falei,
must
então,
give the
são datas
names.
do
So
movimento
in
negro
Brazil, we have
que às
dates
vezes é
from the
muito só
Black
lembrada nesse
movement
período, que é
that are
maio,
only
julho, que é o
recalled
Dia
in May
Internacional
and in
da Mulher
July, which is the
Negra,
International
Latina,
Day of Latin
Caribenha, e
American
novembro, né?
Black
Então a gente
and
precisa de
Caribbean
fato
women,
não só
and
fazer
the Day of Black
debates
Awareness.
e
So we
ações
must
só
not
nesse
only
período.
have
A gente
debates
precisa
and
ter
actions in
consciência,
this time
né?
period.
Como a
We
Chicone
must be
vem
aware,
levantando essa bandeira,
as our union
365
has
dias por
done,
ano ou
to raise
366
this
dias por ano,
banner
se for olhar para os números. Então, de
365
fato, tem
days a
que ter
week.
essa luta
In fact, we must
diariamente.
have the
E que, de
struggle
fato, os
every
sindicatos
day.
precisam entender
And
que
the
não é
trade
só
unions
nós,
must
negras e
understand
negros,
that
que
it's
devemos
not
levantar
we,
a bandeira
black men
contra
and
o
women, that
racismo.
should
Essa é uma
raise the
luta de todos os
flag
setores,
against
de todos.
racism. This is a
Devemos estar
struggle of
unidos
all of us. We
em
must
luta
all
para a justiça
unite
racial. Então,
in
isso a
struggle
gente
for
precisa fundamental.
racial justice.
Defender as cotas
We
raciais,
must
sejam
defend
numa
racial
iniciativa privada,
quotas
quanto
in
no
the
serviço público,
private
defender as
companies
cotas
as in
na
public
área da
service,
educação, né?
defend
Então,
quotas
no
in the area of
ensino médio, ensino técnico
education,
e nas universidades.
technical
Isso a gente precisa
or
levantar
technical
mais. Todo o
schools or
movimento sindical, com
universities,
certeza, Agripina,
primary,
você pode ter
elementary
certeza,
schools,
está no Vidas
etc.
Negras
We
Importam, está no
must.
Parem de Nos
This is
Matar.
all part
Quando,
of
quando
Black
foi
Lives
assassinada
Matter.
Marielle
And
Franco,
when
né, que é
Marielle Franco
uma
was
mulher
killed,
negra,
a
né, lésbica,
councilwoman,
depois
black woman,
aconteceu
and
uma coisa que a gente vai falar um
lesbian
pouco da
woman
interseccionalidade.
from
Então,
Brazil.
assim, todos nós que
So
estamos nessa
all
luta,
of us
precisa
who
a
are
gente
in the
levantar de fato a
struggle,
bandeira,
we
falar
must
com os nossos
really
trabalhadores e
raise our
trabalhadoras e
banners,
fazer um
talk to our
processo
workers, and
educativo, porque
carry
só
out
assim
an
você vai conseguir
educational process, because only by
alcançar essa
doing
justiça
this
racial.
we'll
Mas
be
vai ficar
able to
muito difícil
achieve
fazer,
racial
né? Então
justice. But we
a
still
gente
have a
vive
lot
numa
to do.
sociedade
We
racista,
are
né?
built,
Que ainda
we
tem
are
muitas atitudes
raised in
racistas
a
e só
racist
através de
society
processos
with many
educativos
racist
que a gente vai
attitudes. And it's only through education that we may transform the world and have a more equal world. Thank you.
Gracias, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. Carlos, same question for you. How the movement in Uruguay uh, that you belong to, what have they done in terms of racial justice in your country? Despite the fact that Uruguay is a small country, there's a lot of injustice and discrimination, racial discrimination. So, Carlos, please. Yes, for us, it's been difficult to deal with this point because it's been dealt with more specifically whenever we had some cases. 4 years ago, for example, there was a situation of a black worker in a private company where there was attitude from a negative attitude from other workers, and then that was sent to the workers Congress, and then they decided to make different actions to help those workers. But with the death of George Floyd, that helped us to really bring this matter to surface and to discuss and to debate this problem. We talked about the lack of policy in this direction, and that the commitment that was made really could not be put into practice. But it doesn't mean that there is no movement that would take action, and there are actually carrying out a struggle in this direction. But there are anti-racist blocs of our brothers and sisters who are fighting and defending African descendant women. And when we have a brother or sister that is murdered, be it because of violence in the home, I mean, that does happen as well. And then it is made aware and there's mobilization carried out in this sense. But there's no really a work that people would come up and really raise their voices in this sense. What I see in general is that this certain political sectors have taken this responsibility, and we have to consider them. But we in our union and trade union, we've been carrying out actions in this for this, but there have been very few. But in Uruguay, we still have to really understand the situation of the Black population and to the situation that was lived since 1813 onwards in terms of slavery, slaves coming from Brazil, Peru, into our society. There's been a major change, and now we have the social consequences that are product of that or a consequence of that. And to know that in Uruguay, about 40% of the Black population live below the line of poverty. So normally women who carry out this stigma in life. So we, for sure, we know that with the pandemic, this has become even worse. I am going to change a bit the scheme that we were using, asking the same questions, because we have got other questions through the chat. And I think it's important for Miguel Morante. Luis Miguel, how do you believe? Can you hear me?
Luis Miguel.
Luis Miguel?
Bueno, sí.
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 ¿Cómo cree usted? Luis
a,
Miguel.
de lo que yo he mencionado a raíz de la muerte de Freud,
No, entonces
la,
déjeme le
No,
hago
no.
la pregunta.
I have a question for you
Porque es una
first,
pregunta muy importante que
because it's a very
nuestro
important question that
asistente
we
está colocando
need,
preguntas en el
and
chat
everyone is asking questions in the chat. So,
para contestarnos esta pregunta y es,
in order to answer
pregunta
these
la compañera
questions,
Michelle y
how
Carlos, ¿cómo cree
we're
usted
also going
que
to
el
ask Michelle and Carlos, how do you
sindicalismo
believe that the trade union movement of Europe and the US
ayudar a los
could help
diferentes países
the different countries of Latin
que
America?
pueden
How could they help us?
¿Cómo cree usted?
How do you believe they could help us?
bueno, ahí la forma,
Well,
digamos,
the way that
tradicional
ideal, traditional way,
digamos
The
así, es
more
regular
traditional
conduct
way of
is
doing
the
it,
C,
CCI en el mundo.
the
Algunos
ITUC and the TUCA. The TUCA in the Americas and the ITUC in the whole world. They can support us. The ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation, and they can help all the trade unions and federations in the world. And I believe we can have a proposal that is coordinated, organized, but all of us who integrate these two organizations and get their cooperation. I believe this is the pathway to obtain this this support from the European Union and also from the US. With the change in government, we can see what could be. They were a bit isolated, but today they are going to be more open. And so, equally, we could have this line of unity supporting each other. But the ITUC and the TUCA can help us in many ways. And we have a sister who is Afro descendant, and she represents the CTC in the ITUC, and equally in the TUCA. The representative is me from the CTC, and there we can see how can we get some support from them. It's very important that we act together in this. Thank you, Luis Miguel. Also, Carlos, for you, as a trade unionist, how do you believe the workers and the labor movements in Europe and Africa, from Europe and the US, can support the South American trade unions? For us, it's really important to strengthen our links with each one of these countries because we are undergoing this problem. Therefore, and as Michelle was saying clearly, the 365 days a year, we must have a very strong link and have references so that this situation is visualized not only in each one of the countries, but also every day, not only in special dates. So in the moment that different organizations at the national and international levels with permanent contact that we have with these international organizations, we can inform these organizations what we are undergoing in our countries and let them know at the international level. And today we have tools, communication tools, that we can use and make it feasible. For us, it's fundamental to get information at the international level that will allow us to generate a situation at the worldwide level so that the problem is visualized. Also, for you, Michelle, the same question. How do you believe, Michelle, that trade unionism from Europe and from the US can strengthen us and help us help our trade unions in South America and in the Americas. I think it's fundamental to have an exchange of experiences. The PSI is already doing this work in a brilliant way, having the possibility of being in contact with other trade unions, as the US trade unions, the European trade unions. It's fundamental for the strengthening of workers, men and women. Here in the Americas, we have, through the Committee of the Americas region, last year we had the conference in Argentina where all the unions affiliated to the PSI were present, sharing their experiences within their committees. There's women's committees, committee to combat racism and xenophobia, youth committee. There are many moments where we can be there sharing and learning from each other. So it's fundamental to learn both from the US, from the European Union, but we believe that here in the American region, we have a lot to show them. So, in fact, it's an anti-capitalist struggle, and the workers must unite because, in fact, we must break up this neoliberal policy and capitalist economy that enslaves us. So, this will strengthen us as working class.
Gracias, Michelle. Y
Thank you,
bueno,
Michelle.
sabemos que hoy en
We
día
know
los
that
movimientos
today
feministas, los movimientos
the
de mujeres,
feminist
los movimientos
movement,
de
the women's
jóvenes y
movement,
los
the
movimientos de la
youth
población
movements,
LGTBI también
and the
es
LGBT
discriminada
population
y
movement
es
too
excluida.
is discriminated
Están
and
muy fuertes, han
excluded, and
resurgido con todo al calor de este
and they
movimiento
are
Las Vidas Negras Importan.
very
Michelle,
close to
¿usted
the
cree que la
movement
justicia
of Black
racial
Lives Matter. Michelle, do you think
es
that
posible
racial
sin
justice is
igualdad
possible
para las
without
mujeres en el trabajo?
equality for
¿Y
women
cómo cree usted
in
que
the
este movimiento
labor
podríamos,
world,
está relacionado con los
and
movimientos
how
sociales,
this
incluyendo pues el de
relates
mujeres,
to
la
the
población
social
LGTBI, de jóvenes,
movements,
pueblos originarios?
the
¿Cómo cree que
the
esto lo podemos
committees of LGBT
hermanar en una
women and
gran
so on?
unión y
How
frente de
can
trabajo
we
y frente
propose a
de
great
lucha para
union to
combatir estas
work
desigualdades
with
sociales?
this and combat this inequality?
Sí, es necesario
It's
usar la transversalidad
necessary
para
to
actuar y
to be cut
porque claro,
crossing hay
una
because
enorme discriminación contra la
there
mujer
is great
y hay una
discrimination
discriminación también
against women
contra las afrodescendientes,
and also against
contra la raza negra,
Afro-descendants,
digámoslo así claramente.
against the
Y
black
entonces, si es una
race.
mujer, pues tendrá
So if
doble
it's a
discriminación.
woman,
O sea que no
there's
podemos
worse
pensar
discrimination,
en un solo,
not
para un solo
only
punto,
in one
sino que vamos a hacerlo
aspect,
de manera
but in
conjunta.
more
De tal
than
manera
one,
que esta lucha
because she is a
la
woman
unifiquemos.
and she's black.
En, el,
That's the struggle we have.
en la Declaración de Principios y Derechos Fundamentales en el Trabajo
In
del CITES,
the
publicada en
Declaration of
1998,
Principles
que aún está vigente, que hoy
that
día
was
más que
still
nunca
in
necesita
force, that was
que la
from
apliquemos.
1998, it
Tenemos
established very clearly
un eje es precisamente la
we
discriminación,
want an
trata
access
contra la
against
discriminación y
discrimination
habla de discriminación racial y la
that
discriminación
speak
como
about
principales. Pero hay otros más,
racial
discriminación
discrimination, social
por orientación sexual,
discrimination,
por
other
religión,
forms
otras,
of
pero
discrimination.
las que más pesan
The
en este momento
ones
sobre la sociedad
that are
es la de la
heavier
mujer y la de la
are
racial.
the
En consecuencia,
discrimination of
valdría la pena
women and the
proponer
racial
que
discrimination.
siempre que
So it
hablemos de
would be
discriminación,
worth it
hablemos de las discriminaciones, de todas las
every time
discriminaciones,
there is
pero
discrimination.
fundamentalmente la discriminación contra la mujer y la discriminación
We
racial.
should
Eso
fight every
es muy obvio
discrimination
y
against
trataremos de
women
hacerlo
and
en nuestras
against race.
agendas de
This is
trabajo dentro
basic.
de la CTC.
This is the work we do within
Gracias,
the
Luis Miguel.
CTC.
Igualmente para
Thank you,
usted,
Luis
Carlos,
Miguel. Now, for you, Carlos,
piensa la misma pregunta.
do,
¿Es
the
posible
same
que la
question.
justicia racial
Is it
se
possible
pueda
to have
alcanzar con las
racial
mujeres en el
justice
trabajo?
with
¿Cómo podemos
equality
conectar
for
todo
women?
esto,
And how can
estos
we start
movimientos de la
this?
justicia racial con
How
otros
can we
movimientos
have
sociales
racial
como los de
justice
jóvenes, de la población
together with the other
LGTBI, de
movements
todos
such
estos
as
movimientos de
youth,
pueblos
women,
originarios
LGBT, all the
que
other
están allí, que
movements
podemos de pronto en
that
una
we can maybe unite to fight for this, to get a better equality around the world without discrimination.
Yes, basically, I believe that the capitalist system, because of the type of thought behind that, has to do with classes, and it needs a way to dominate and to carry out that. So it works the aspects of discrimination in order to divide any force of fight that is trying to ask and fight for something. So we as workers who fight for our rights and for a radical transformation of society in which we live, a society without those who are exploiting and those who are exploited and oppressed. And I think it is this patriarchal type of society, and for sure, for us, it is basic, the point that we need to fight and to face all types of discrimination. And in this sense, I believe that the trade union movement has to raise this flag and this fight. And I think that it is possible for us to transform society radically. And I believe that we need to work permanently and in this direction, and that we have to see, for example, 8th of March in Uruguay, we've seen major mobilization. Before, we had some that didn't have even 5,000, 6,000 people. And now in Uruguay, in March 8th, you have over 300,000 people out in the streets claiming for justice and the rights of women. And so for us, we believe that this movement of women is important and it is present. And we believe that in terms of racism, it is necessary to carry out this work and to really make progress with the goal to build a new society, totally different, where we all are included and feel included. Thank you, Carlos. Equally for you, Michelle, the same question.
Nossa, sim, Agripina. Aqui no
Yes,
Brasil,
thank you, Agripina. Here in Brazil,
vamos botar no sentido dos movimentos
let's
sociais,
say in terms of social movements, there is groups coming together quite a bit, and there is a movement of women. They are together, they are united for racial justice. The Black movement also comes and joins women movement and the LGBTIQ plus, and all these movements, they come together because here, despite the fact that we are a large group, we say that we are a minority group because we are not in the power positions or have the right to speak and have a voice. So we are united. And even in our National Congress, the leader of the minority among the congressmen that have to bring these issues together: gender, race, sexual orientation. And so they are together. Here in Brazil, this is quite solid and people do come together. But in order for that to have more impact in society, we have to elect our representatives. We have to elect women, LGBTIQ plus, in order to elect these people so that we can have representation in Congress, be it for gender, race, and social is already quite big. So we need to have representation that would fight for our rights. But within the social sphere, there's different sectors coming together. I give you a very easy example, very practical example. I don't know if this was seen in other countries, but last week, young lady that was raped, Mariana Ferrer, she was humiliated before a judge by her rapists. So all social movements came together here in Rio. It was on Sunday. And when we got there, we had the Black movement, we had LGBTIQ plus movement, women, everyone defending those girls. So this is quite strong, but we do need to broaden this movement and to take over these areas so that we can have concrete action. The union movement is there present, and it's important for us to highlight as we are in this discussion. The union movement is always present in the fight for human rights and equality.
Gracias, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Hacerle otra pregunta.
I am going to ask other questions coming from the chat. Quite important, so we start with you, Carlos, because you're ready. And the question is coming from Africa. And CSI Africa, he asks, how can Black workers from the different countries of South America strengthen the links and to give support with other union organizations in our countries in South America? Well, we have the International Public Service, IPS. We have room to share in this sense. And we would need to have to be more persistent in this sense, and I believe that there is room. The point is how we as workers, how can we make use of the situation and how we can work towards that, because many times we face other things that are urgent and we prioritize things that are urgent, but not really, they are not the ones that we would have to really have in our agenda. For me, in IPS, this is a tool that can bring us all together with policies to help us do that, not just to the unions at the national level, but that for us to carry out this type of policy is very important, but we might need also to discuss in the IPS this issue. Thank you, Carlos. So the same question, Luis Miguel. How can we, Black workers from different countries in South America, how can we strengthen from South America these links with organizations from other countries? I think Carlos just said that, and he mentioned here is the world organization where we could try and get help, and not just IPS, but also others, international organizations that could bring us together, that are working in our continents, and of course in Europe, but to try and have this coming closer together to help each other. But we would have to get the people from CCI that are responsible for that. We are going to make contact, and today even I will tell you, Agrippina, later on during the week when we could meet so that we could find a way out. So this is practical to have a solution for that. But I think the CSCI is the right pathway in order to have this support. Thank you, Luis Miguel. Same thing for you, Michelle. How do you believe that we could strengthen this alliance between countries, organizations, in order to work and strengthen the position of Black workers in Latin America?
Acho que o Luiz Miguel e o Carlos já falaram
I think Luis Miguel and Carlos have already said about the importance we should within the international public service, but with their answers, I was imagining with our host here
da União da África, né, global,
of the African Union, saying that it's going through Africa and the diaspora, that we could actually bring together a huge congress of Black workers where we could really listen to all experience and sharing from different countries. I understand that he's been doing this
em cada região, né,
in each
olhando a
region,
África e a diáspora,
looking at Africa and the diaspora, but a meeting that would bring together, and so that we could become stronger and come together and exchange experiences. It couldn't be done in one single day because there's so many things that we have to deal with. There's so many different shapes and forms of racism, and it would be very important for us to have this meeting of Black workers in the world, and that would strengthen us as we are in this fight for Black Lives Matter, and the whole world is looking at that because of George Floyd's choking. Why not doing that in the union field, looking at workers and workers telling us all their stories and experiences as Black workers, especially based on racist issues. This would be a major action, really, for the unions and that we could do as a union movement.
Thank you, Michelle. I think that before everything that you said, you mentioned, this is one of the goals of this workshop. The Global African Workers Institute aims at globalizing the struggle, and we must recognize with all these world webinars that will end next year. But we must recognize that we must develop a united position with the workers in Africa that have suffered from the diaspora and Gawi, and it will be facilitated by the PSI. We will build and strengthen links of solidarity, links of work, because the fight against racism must be globalized in this globalized world. And this is also, that's why we are together with the Global African Workers Institute. And we want to globalize the fight against racism in the world of labor. I'm also being asked, we've been here for a long time, but I would like to, we are at how can we join the how can we help the Afro-Latin and indigenous population in this relationship? So how can, as we saw with Michelle in Brazil, there is this terrible burning of the Amazon forest, and how indigenous of the original peoples of Brazil have died victims of COVID, and many were killed by by the structural racism too in Brazil.
Agripina, no Brasil é uma luta.
Yes, in Brazil, it's a struggle. Through the Black movement, the original peoples, the indigenous peoples, we are united. Also with the trade unionism, and CUT, the Labor Congress in Brazil, is doing very strong work with the indigenous peoples in a struggle to preserve life. In fact, all of this, today in Brazil, we have a fascist government, a racist government, macho-oriented government. They think that We must colonize the indigenous people. They do not accept indigenous culture and indigenous people, their traditions, their languages. So the indigenous people need them, what their land demarked. And this is a fight from the agribusiness. They want to get their land. That's why they set fire in the Amazon, in the Pantanal, and they want to kill the indigenous people so that they cannot fight for their rights. But this is a fight of the Brazilian people to defend the indigenous. It's the fight against the capital. So as long as there is capitalism, there will be racism. So we really must have an anti-capitalist fight so that we can have our Black people, our indigenous people, and from all the different original peoples from Latin America, how much they were killed, how much they had their land taken, and how much they were imposed the cultural, their Western culture. In Brazil, we have strong Afro Brazilian religions, but there is a lot of racism. We also must speak about different types of racism, especially the religious racism that does not let us worship our religion. They do that to the indigenous people too. And so we are fighting together with the indigenous people too.
Gracias, Michelle. Carlos, para
Thank you,
usted
Michelle.
igualmente,
Carlos, for you,
¿cómo es el relacionamiento del
what,
movimiento
how is the
afro
relationship
en
of the
Uruguay
Afro
con los
descendants
pueblos
movement
originarios?
in Uruguay with the indigenous people? In Uruguay, we underwent a historical situation that is recognized as Ceci Puedes. The original peoples, Charruas, were invited and militarily, the first president of our nation, Rivera, in this place where they invited all the indigenous people, they had an attack with the military, and very few indigenous people survived. And so most of the indigenous people died in our country. But today they are demanding, certain groups are demanding their original Charrua uh, group or tribe, and they have participated in our mobilizations, and we have mobilized with them. They are deeply in solidarity with us, and we with them. Every time the people, Mapuche people, is oppressed in Argentina or Chile, we coordinate with indigenous and Afro culture groups in our countries, and we denounce these situations. And they have supported us in all the popular coalitions to defend the water, and they also defend water as a human right, and they also participated in other protests. So we have a very strong link, and they raise and denounce these situations of
Vamos con
inequality
ustedes,
and
Michelle. Acá en Colombia
attacks.
sabemos que esa unión
Now,
es
in
fuerte,
Colombia,
pero
we
queremos
know
escucharla de
we want
sus
to
labios.
hear
Bienvenido, Luis Miguel.
from you what's happening in
Bueno,
Colombia.
sí, en efecto,
Yes,
aquí
in
hemos trabajado
effect,
hace
we
que el
have
21 de octubre
until
hicimos
the 21st of
la
October,
manifestación
we
acompañando la
we
amiga,
had a
amiga que venía del Cauca,
demonstration
con
together with Amiga from the
tribus,
Cauca, with
varias
several
comunidades diferentes de diferentes
communities from
nombres
different, with
y
different
se hizo un
names,
planteo, fue
groups
acompañado
with
por el
different
movimiento
names,
sindical, no
and
solo en
the
la
labor
plaza
movement
pública
joins with
en
them
diferentes
in
actividades. El primero,
demonstrations in different
y fue
activities.
un acto muy importante, muy sublime
And
de
this
actividad.
21st of October was a very
Fue
important
histórico
act we had
y además
together. It was a historical day.
ejemplar
It
porque
was an
el resultado
example because
de
the
ellos durante
conduct,
su viaje, que fueron muchos kilómetros,
they
700 kilómetros más o
traveled
menos de
700
recorrido
kilometers for
en
this
unas
day
camionetas, en unos chicos,
in
digamos así,
small
chivas, de unos
cars
buses
or
muy
station
legendarios,
wagons.
pero ellos
They have
vinieron ahí y
not
hicieron
many
algunas
resources,
escalas
but they
y
came,
aquí estuvieron
and
3
here
días
they
y mantuvieron
stayed for
una
three
convivencia ejemplar.
days.
No hubo
They had
disturbios.
an
En ninguna de sus
exemplary
actividades hubo disturbios porque ellos
conduct
mantienen
or
firme la guardia del grupo.
behavior.
Y,
And
y
the
todo el movimiento sindical acá fue solidario. Y nosotros,
and all the other
el pueblo,
movements
el
and
pueblo
peoples were
bogotano,
in solidarity
fue
with the
solidario. Y
original
después de
peoples, the
eso,
indigenous people.
sigue
And
siendo
after
aún más
this,
solidario
they
por el ejemplo que
continue
dieron
with even more
y
solidarity than before.
porque estuvieron eh, demostrando su fuerza
They demonstrated their
con mucha
strength
caridad, como
with
magistralmente,
a lot
pero
of strength,
igualmente con todo el
but
respeto
equally
y
with
sin
all the
causar desmanes
respect.
ni daños a la comunidad mía
And
presente.
we
Eso fue
held
muy
hands
importante, muy
with
importante
our
y me dieron
communities.
una gran
This is
lección
very
por
important. They
consiguiente
gave us a
ese
great
trabajo hay que seguirlo
lesson.
haciendo. Eso no puede quedarse ahí
And
como con un
so
episodio que ocurrió muy bonito y se acabó, sino que
it was a
será
very
permanente
nice day. It
la
was very
relación que
beautiful.
nosotros
It's not
en pos,
over. We will
además que hemos
continue to
trabajado
support each
muy
other.
muy en conjunto con ellos,
They are
no solamente en la
fighting
colegio,
with
sino
us
con
and
los
we are
demás
fighting with them.
sectores en nuestras
There are
regiones,
other
en
sectors of
otras
trade
comunidades en el norte
unionism
del
that will
país,
support them
que
too.
son muy importantes, que están siendo diezmados, e igualmente
They
en el
are
noroccidente del país, donde
being
tienen
attacked in
grandes
the
dificultades y problemas
eastern
del pueblo
world,
de Dios.
in the
Bueno,
eastern
pues
part of
aquí
the
estamos en
country, in
esa
the
misión y
western
denunciando
part of the
todo hecho de
country. So we
desgraciado
denounce
de las
all of
comunidades
this,
indígenas y de los
uh,
descendientes.
everything that happens to the
Gracias,
indigenous
Luis Miguel. Y para
communities.
complementar
Thank
esa
you, Luis
pregunta que nos hacen
Miguel.
a través de
And
nuestro
to
chat,
complement
quiero
this
contarles que
question through the
dentro del
chat, I'd
proceso de
like
paz
to say that within
eh,
the peace
fue muy
process,
importante la
it
alianza
was very
de
important to have the alliance
organizaciones afro
of
como CENO, como
Afro
TCN,
organization as Phenom
como
and FICM,
AFROES y
AFROS,
el CRI y todas las grandes
CRI,
organizaciones
and all
indígenas
the other
para
indigenous
trabajar ese
organizations
capítulo étnico.
in order to
Ese
work
capítulo
with
étnico fue
this
una fuerza
ethnical
y allí
chapter.
tuvimos el
And
apoyo
we
del
had the
presidente Obama a través del
support of
Departamento de Estado, quien
president from
obligó
the
a
State
los
Department
negociadores en La Habana que
that called
recibieran
the
a la comisión étnica que
negotiators
integramos en ese
in
momento, de la
the
cual yo fui parte.
Havana and
Y
that
logramos
welcomed the commission, and we were able
incluir dentro
to
del proceso de
include
paz, dentro de lo
within
que
the
se
peace
acordó en el proceso de
process
paz,
and what
comenzar
was
un
agreed
capítulo
upon
étnico.
to
Ese
have
capítulo
a
étnico
specific
fue una
chapter
lucha
on
a través
indigenous people.
del
It's
lobby
a
que se
struggle
hizo
through the
con,
lobby that
con
was
congresistas, con
made
representantes de Estados Unidos que nos
with
apoyaron, políticos como
representatives
WOLA,
from the US that
y muchas
supported us,
organizaciones de
many
presión
different
internacional que
organizations
obligaron a
of
que se abriera
international
ese espacio
pressure
para que se
that helped us
conociera,
to
quedara
open
allí
up the
plasmado
space so
todo
that
lo que
we got
fue
to know each
y
other
sigue siendo
and we could
la
denounce
incidencia
everything
del
that
conflicto
happened
armado
and that's
hacia los
still
grupos
happening
étnicos
in
en
terms of
Colombia,
armed struggle
afrodescendientes e
against
indígenas.
ethnical
Y ese
groups in
capítulo étnico
Colombia.
fue un
And this
logro, como
chapter
le digo, gracias a la
was
solidaridad
successful
internacional,
thanks to the
a varios
international
congresistas como Tim
solidarity,
McGovern, que nos visitaron
congressmen
y nos ayudaron
that
acá en México
visited
para
and
que se
helped
abriera ese
us
espacio en La
so
Habana
that
y
this
pudimos incluir
space
un
could be
capítulo
open
étnico
in Havana and
que
they
creo
could
que quedó
include an
allí, ahí
ethnical
está,
chapter
en los
in
acuerdos de
this,
paz y que fue un
peace
logro que
agreements.
demostró que
This
si nos
was a
unimos con otros
success
grupos
that demonstrated that
igualmente
we
en condición de
united with other groups
vulnerabilidad podemos lograr grandes
in
cosas.
terms
La
of
comisión étnica que se
vulnerability,
formó
we
con los
can
indígenas y
count
los
on them.
afrodescendientes en Colombia lo
And
demostró. Hoy esa
the
comisión
representative
sigue
from Colombia
funcionando porque
showed to
seguimos
the Andean
presionando a que
region
el acuerdo de paz de La
representative
Habana
the
se cumpla,
agree
porque hoy tenemos
the
un
peace
gobierno que le
agreement
calza, ¿me
from the
entiende? De
Havana
hecho, lo quiere acabar.
and
Y eso es un logro porque ese acuerdo de
this
paz
is
no solamente
successful
para
for
Colombia,
us
fue un acuerdo
because
de
this
paz para el
agreement
mundo.
is important not
Logró
only for Colombia,
desmovilizar,
but
acabar un
it
conflicto
has
armado de
the
casi
power
60
to
años
mobilize
en Colombia eso es un logro para la humanidad porque
it's an achievement for
entonces
humanity
allí
because
demostramos
of
que
the
sí podemos, que
peace.
podemos trabajar y
And
que
then
seguimos
we
trabajando.
can
En
see
Colombia
that
hizo unión
we
con
can continue to work
afrodescendientes
in
e indígenas,
Colombia
pueblos
with
originarios, en búsqueda
Afro-descendants,
de objetivos comunes
indigenous
como es
peoples,
acabar con las desigualdades sociales y raciales
and
en
we
nuestro
can
país.
work to do
Igualmente,
away with
yo
the
creo que ya
inequalities,
vamos
social
discutiendo el tiempo
inequalities,
de
and
otras preguntas, pero
trade
eh,
unions
no
or
podemos
workers'
abusar de nuestros
inequality.
intérpretes
So I
igualmente del
thank
tiempo de
all the
ustedes. Es la
interpreters.
última
It's
pregunta
about
y esta
time
es,
we finish. We
¿cuáles
have a
creen que
last
deben ser las
question.
prioridades de los
We have
trabajadores
some priorities
afrodescendientes en
for
América Latina?
Afro-descendant workers
De
in
todo
Latin
estos temas que
America
hemos hablado. Ya Michelle
and
nos
all
hablaba de
of
algo, ya
the
de pronto la
issues.
pregunta que nos hacía Cuasi desde África, de cómo
So that
podemos
was
nosotros
a
fortalecer
question
eso,
about Africa.
la,
How can they
la
help us?
contestaron, pero ya para terminar y
They
como
answered
conclusiones
it.
quiero escucharlo empezando con Carlos que está aquí ya
And
dijiste
I'm
Carlos
going
todo,
to
de cómo podemos nosotros
listen to the
fortalecer
answer, first of all,
estos
with
lazos,
Carlos. How
qué
can we
podemos hacer,
strengthen
cuáles son
these
nuestras
links?
prioridades y
And
cómo ustedes
what can we do?
desde
What
allá,
are
desde
our
Uruguay, desde
priorities?
Brasil, desde
And
Colombia, de
how
toda Sudamérica
from
podemos
Brazil,
empezar a
Uruguay,
fortalecer
Colombia,
esta
how
propuesta
can we
del Global
strengthen
Africa
this
Working Institute,
proposal of global
que pienso que es
African
una apuesta por
workers?
la que tenemos que hacer.
And
Tenemos la
what we
Internacional
have
de
to
Servicios
do,
Públicos, como lo
we
decía
have the
Michelle y lo decía
PSI to help
Carlos
us.
y Luis Miguel,
So
pero
we will
también
listen to
tenemos lugares
Carlos
donde
and
lo
Luis
podemos
Miguel,
fortalecer y va a
but
ser una
we can also
alternativa, pero
strengthen
también
this
una hermandad
with
global
an
en la lucha contra el
alternative and
racismo
a
y la discriminación
fraternal
racial, la xenofobia y todas
brotherhood
estas
at the
formas
international
de,
level
de falta de
against all
justicia racial
forms of
que nos aquejan a los
injustice, especially
afrodescendientes
the
en el
racial
mundo. Bienvenido,
injustice
Carlos.
in the world. Welcome, Carlos.
Well, just to say about the situation in our country, and our main concern is that the Black population is marginal to the society and economically as well. So in Uruguay, 47% of African descent Blacks, they do not finish their primary schooling. So that's part of the economic situation. And this is getting worse and worse. Second, the population that's more vulnerable is women, and not just exploited in general tasks that are less productive and tasks that are secondary to others and badly paid, but that they are the ones in charge of a family. And they're the ones that have irregular work, employment situation, they are not organized. And I want to start there. I mean, to start demanding and demonstrating clearly the situations that are generated and that we've been supplying and providing for historically, and no attention has been paid to that. And now we are linked to, many of them are not linked to a union organization. And it's very important to work in the defense of workers, of the sectors that are more left out. That's where we have to be, but we have to see a problem that has not been seen historically, and we have to point out and make sure that it is different, and that's done just like it's done with problems with women and other areas. We think that this has to be part of the agendas, and this has to be taken into consideration. And for us, basically, these talks, this forum, they're very important because they bring us together and we can share the activities that we are carrying out and also the specificity of our work and the progress that different countries are doing. But I believe that we might be able to somehow carry out something done in writing so that we can share this area, as well as strengthening Global African Institute because I think it is important that these problems are seen and that historically we have been dragging and dragging with us in the diaspora, and the African continent has been sacked, and pillage has been done in that continent. Everything has been done against Africa. Excellent, Carlos. So, Luis Miguel, now for you, the same question. So, what do you think are the priorities for workers, and how can we, from our organization, strengthen the organization and also ourselves in this topic and the globalization as well? So,
Importante iniciativa.
It's an important initiative. We should continue in the action. This kind of meeting that now we can have massively with the pandemic, this virtual meetings will help us a lot to be able to create awareness. Because the meetings in presence or physical presence was different because it had much more costs. So I believe that now it's worth to continue with these virtual meetings, and let's involve more and more people in these struggles with the campaigns, in the campaign that is in the trade union activity for racial equality, and in this case, to eliminate discrimination. So we want to be involved in this, and I think it's really worth it to continue with this. We are not paralyzed, and we will continue with this important struggle. And this is a central issue for us and for the executive committee of the CTC. And we will do it gradually. We will do this work. We will continue. We have a very tight schedule in our agenda, but in December, we will be working with important issues, and the brothers and sisters Michelle and Carlos that are very interested in this issue, we're going to be partners and work together with them. Thank you very much. Thank you, Luis Miguel. So, Michelle, for your final remarks.
Nesse momento, né, eu acho que como a gente...
At
Desculpa.
this moment,
Desculpa.
I thought I should answer right away. I'm
Pode
sorry.
continuar, Agripina.
You can continue, Agripina.
Ah, tá. Eu acho que nesse momento...
I think that at this moment, when
como a
we
gente
see
conversou aqui sobre o movimento
the
das vidas negras
movement
importas,
of
eu acho que a
Black Lives
prioridade
Matter
tem que ser
and the
a luta
priority
antirracista.
must
Então,
be the
com as
anti-race
experiências que foram
struggle
compartilhadas aqui,
with the
tanto
experiences that
falando
were
sobre o
shared
Brasil,
with
como Luiz
me,
Miguel e você,
but both
Agripina, da Colômbia, e no caso,
myself
falando
speaking
do
about
Uruguai,
Brazil,
é
you and
importante a
Luis
gente
Miguel
saber que
speaking about
a
Colombia and
desigualdade
Carlos
social,
about
as
Uruguay. It's
condições
important to
precárias,
know
a
that the
falta de
social
educação e a baixa
inequality, the
instrução que a nossa
precarious
população negra
conditions,
tem,
the
isso
low
tudo foi
literacy of
perpetuado
our
por conta
Black
do racismo.
population was
Então, a
perpetuated
prioridade é a
by
luta
racism.
antirracista
So
e
the
é
priority
fundamental
is the
que os
anti-racist
nossos
struggle,
sindicatos se
and it's
unam nessa
fundamental
luta.
that our trade
Mas aí,
unions
como eu falei,
unite
não é
in the
só de
struggle,
nós
but it's
negros e
not
negras, né?
only a struggle
Principalmente com
for
todo o
we, the
conjunto de
Black people,
trabalhadores,
but
porque,
with the
como a
whole
Angela Davis
world
fala,
of
não basta ser não
workers.
racista,
it's not enough to be non-racist. You have to be anti-racist. Our struggle is therefore fundamental so that, in fact, we have a racial equality and a social equality for equal rights. And then we should consider also gender equality. And once again, thank you for being able to participate in this debate. We had one in September. It's very important. It's important the work that the PSI has been doing in its agenda to combat homophobia, LGBT, women, gender, and racial equality. Thank you very much.
Gracias a Michelle, gracias a los panelistas,
Thank
a
you,
todos los
Michelle. Thank you,
asistentes, a
all
todos
the
los presentes.
panelists,
Los
at
invitamos a
everyone
una serie
who
de seminarios que
watched.
continuamos alrededor del
And
mundo
we
y
will
desde ya
continue
todos
with
ustedes
our
están invitados
struggle
a
around
conectarse y
the
a
world.
seguirnos fortaleciendo al Global
And we
Africa
will
Workers Institute.
continue to
Entonces,
strengthen the Global
terminando ya,
African
le doy
Workers
la
Institute.
entrada
So
a
thank
Melvin
you
Terence para que
for
haga el cierre de este
Melvin
importante seminario.
Terence. He
Pienso
will
que lo
now
que aquí se ha dicho ha sido muy
give us
importante.
his
Hemos
final
conocido
words for
experiencias, hemos
today.
aprendido, pero
We
ya
had many
toda ese tema
experiences. We learned a
en la
lot
mesa, creo
from
que muy interiorizado de la
everything that
solidaridad y de
was
la
mentioned here.
hermandad y
It
de
was
la
very
globalización que
good
esta
to
pandemia nos ha
feel
hecho,
the
la
brotherhood
globalización de la
and the
lucha porque la
globalization of
internet
the
y la
struggle
tecnología informática
through
nos
the
permite
internet
globalizar la
and this
lucha,
technology
materializarla. Y
that
entonces,
allows us to
bienvenido Melvin
globalize
para
our
que
struggle.
este
It's very
cierre de este
important.
importante seminario en
Now,
Sudamérica.
Terence, could you
Gracias.
please, Melvin Terence, conclude with your final words?
Thank you so much, Agrippina, for moderating and pulling together today's panel. I want to give a special thank you to our panelists, Michelle, Carlos, and Luis. This was a very inspiring talk. This is what we are trying to do across the globe, which is to have real conversations about what is impacting us of African descent in every country. We find and we've known that we have the same issues, whether we're in North America, South America, whether we're in the Caribbean, whether we're in the continent of Africa, whether we're in Europe, or whether we're in Asia. People of African descent face very similar issues. And COVID-19 has really raised these issues to the forefront. And what do we see? We see the movement that happened that resurfaces of Black Lives Matter here in the United States, which has went global across the globe, not because of one person being killed in the street while the world watched, but because people of African descent across the globe are just sick and tired of being sick and tired. It is time for us to stand up for our rights. It is time for us to address the issues of racial discrimination across the globe, both within our society and I dare say within the labor movement as a whole. It is time for us to upfront address the issue of LGBTQ rights across the globe. It is time for us to lift up the issue of women's rights across the globe. We cannot sit back anymore and just be second-class citizens and accept it from those who think they are better than us. We are equal, in many cases greater than many of those that are out there that are trying to suppress the Black person and the Black people across this globe. Remember that the civilization started in Africa. We are where it all began, and we have to take our rightful place in this society. The Global African Worker Institute is being put together for that issue only, for us to come together, collectively discuss these issues, have a family discussion about these issues, and come up with some real solid ways of dealing with it from this day going forward. So I want to a special thank to my Vice Chair Kwasi from ITCU Africa, who is on the call today, who is listening in. He is leading our discussions that we're doing on the continent of Africa. A special thank you to John Odo, who is on from Africa, who is on the call. Mercedes, who helped Agrippina pull together today's session. Let me thank all of those who tuned in to listen to this discussion that we're having today. It will be posted on our website where individuals will have an opportunity to hear, those that could not be here with us today, the discussion that we are having today. On next week, we will be going back to the continent of Africa. I believe we're doing West Africa next week. Don't hold me to it. I believe that's where we're going next week. But I would encourage those that are on the call today to tune in so that you can firsthand hear the conversation from our brothers and sisters on the continent of Africa. And you will find, as I have found, and those that are working with the Gawi have found, that the issues are the same. Even the oppressor is the same. And I truly believe that we collectively coming together can come up with real solutions that will lift us to the level that we need to be in our society and take our rightful place. So again, I thank you for being part of this inspiring conversation that we've had. This is just the beginning. We will have greater conversations. We will continue in the virtual atmosphere that we are in now. And as soon as COVID lifts, we aspire to have a huge convention, a Congress, where we can bring together our brothers and sisters from around the globe and have a real in-depth, in-person conversation of not just the issues, but the solutions. Because it is more about coming to solutions than it's just talking about issues. So again, thank you for participating. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for being part of the family. And once you are part of the Gawi family, you will never leave. So we will be counting on you in the future to come and be a part of our dialogue that we have going forward. So thank you again. And at this time, we bring, I will turn it back over to Agrippina to close out the session.
Bueno, no sé si nuestro anfitrión nos puede tomar una foto para que todos prendan
I don't know if our host can take a photo so that we can, if you could take a photo of the whole group, at least or Ewan or someone could help us with that. I would like to thank the interpreters for their patience. And for us, Michelle and I, we speak so fast. So I'd like to thank the interpreters for this wonderful work. I think that without you, it would not have been possible for us to break this language barrier. So it's very important. Thank you. You were with us with the Caribbean meeting. Now it's South America. So you're very important. And we thank you for your mission and your work. And we hope to be able to continue counting on you and all of you, Luis Miguel, Michelle, Carlos, for your willingness to be here. And those who are following us in the series of world seminars to globalize the fight against racism and discrimination in the world. Thanks, everyone. I don't know if the photo was taken, but thanks, everyone. And we hope to see you next week in our next webinar.
Un saludo a todos, a todos. Muy bien.
Thank you, Agrippina.
Obrigado.